that you've asked before. I've asked this question before. Why did God miraculously take Enoch and Elijah to heaven? Okay. So why did God? Because if you know with Enoch and Elijah, who could tell me what is something significant about those two people? What was the significant things about those two individuals? Neither one of them died. And they were taken directly to heaven. Right? So they did not have to experience death. They were taken directly to heaven. And the question is why? Why did God choose to take Enoch and Elijah directly to heaven? Okay? So let's turn back in the Bible to Genesis chapter 5. Okay? We'll go to Genesis chapter 5 and we'll see where this is discussed at here. So in Genesis chapter 5, Moses is writing about the genealogy, and he says here in Genesis chapter 5, verse 24, he says, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." Okay? So Enoch basically lived for 365 years, and then he walked with God, meaning that he walked with God, going in correspondence with what we just learned of walking in the Spirit, meaning that Enoch was doing what? He was walking in the righteousness of God. And you remember, when Enoch was alive, at that time on the earth, there was no sin, right? This is Genesis chapter 5. What happened in Genesis chapter 3? So when Enoch was alive, when he was walking with God, everybody wanted to follow God, right? No. Remember, so Enoch, like his great-grandson Noah, was a preacher of righteousness. He was preaching truth to a culture that didn't want to hear anything about God. Okay? And we know that here, that he was living in a corrupt time, because after God took him, so after God, basically he just walked into heaven, God tells us after that about what the condition of the people were. Okay? So move over to Genesis 6. So you should be in Genesis chapter 5. Turn over to Genesis chapter 6, and let's look about the thinking of the culture at that time. In Genesis chapter 6, beginning in verse 5, it says, "Then Yahweh saw that the evil of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of the thought of his heart was only evil continually." Now, could you imagine living in a culture where it was continual evil? You know, sometimes when we turn on the news, sometimes, I don't know if you're like me, I don't really like to watch the news, because it seems like it's always what? Bad news. And you're seeing things on, things that are occurred that just kind of leave you with believing how could that happen? It's showing you the depravity of man, really. But could you imagine living in a time where it was evil always, continual evil, to the point where God says that he was grieved that he made man and says, "I'm going to basically start over again with 8 people. We're going to flood the entire world, and you're going to have 8 people, and we're going to start over with 8. Okay? And that's what it says. It says, verse 6, "And Yahweh regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart." Can you imagine that? God grieved in his heart. That he was grieved in his heart. And then it says in verse 7, "And Yahweh said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, from man to animal, to creeping things, to the birds of the sky, for I regret that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of God." And Noah found favor because, how did Noah find favor? Because who shared the truth with Noah? Went back to his family. Went back to Enoch and Methuselah. And now through his father, I think it was Lamech. And that you see that progression going down. So Enoch was 365 years old when he was taken to heaven. Enoch was a seventh generation descendant of Adam through Seth. He was the father of Methuselah and the great-grandfather of Noah. So you see that going down here throughout that line. So, Enoch had a very special place with God, and for God, whatever his decisions, he chose to take Enoch where he would experience death. Now, we see two other passages where we talk about this as well. Turn over to the book of Hebrews. This kind of gives us some additional information here about Enoch. Okay, so the writer of Hebrews writes in chapter 11, verse 5, he's talking about this faith hall of fame, and Enoch is one of those individuals that's placed there. In Hebrews 11, it says, by faith Enoch was taken up so that he would not see death, and he was not found because God took him up. For prior to be taken up, he was approved as being pleasing to God. Okay? So the author of Hebrews seems to suggest here that Enoch was taken to heaven without dying because of his great faith, and it pleased God. So it pleased God in his faith. And Jude then is also going to give us some additional information. Actually, Jude here is going to tell us that Enoch was one of the first people to actually get the first prophecy that we see here. So look real quickly at Jude 14. Okay? So Jude 14 and 15. So it says here that Enoch stood for righteousness. He refused to be silent about the sinfulness all around him. And listen to what Jude says, giving a prophecy about the wicked generation that was during that time. So Jude says, verse 14, but Enoch, in the seventh generation from Adam, also prophesied about these men, saying, behold, the Lord came with many thousands of his holy ones to execute judgment upon all, and to convict all the ungodly of all their ungodly deeds, for which they have done in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. You think it was ungodly at the time? He says here in a couple different reference points here, just in those two verses, it says that he's going to convict them of the ungodliness of their deeds, ungodly ways, and that they were ungodly sinners. So at least four different times he uses that reference point of ungodly. So you see three different passages of Scripture that make reference to Enoch. And so it looks like here, because of Enoch's faith and because of his devotion to God, God chose to take Enoch directly to heaven instead of allowing him to experience actual physical death. Okay? Now that's Enoch. Now the other one would be Elijah. So turn over to 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. So Elijah, remember Elijah was one of the prophets. He was probably the, when you look about the significance of Elijah, he was there with what? There with Moses. You look about when Jesus is there with Moses and Elijah at the Transfiguration. We had Moses representing the law of God, and then Elijah representing the prophets. So you see here with Elijah, he's there with Elisha, and it says in verse 11 of 2 Kings chapter 2, and they were going along and talking. So he's going along, he's talking to Elisha is talking with Elijah is talking with Elisha. Thank you. Elisha. So they're there talking, and it says here that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire and horses of fire, and it separated the two of them, and Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven. So Elijah then is taken up directly to the whirlwind into heaven. So if we know Elijah lived many centuries after Enoch, and he lived specifically under the king Ahab and Azariah, and Israel existed as a divided nation. So this is when Israel's nation was divided, and we saw a lot of different miracles that occurred during Elijah's ministry. He was really confronting the false worship of Baal that was going on during that time. Interesting when you look at the word Elijah, what it actually God is Yahweh in the Lord. That's what his actual name means. So the Bible says Elijah was talking with Elisha, and the two prophets became separated, and again he was then taken directly by a chariot of fire, pulled by flaming horses, and he's carried off into heaven. So whirlwind, he's transported here directly into heaven. So again, the question comes is, why did God take Enoch and Elijah? All we can really do is speculate. We don't know. We don't have a direct verse that tells us. The only thing we really can conclude the reason it would be is because of their faithfulness. Because of their faithfulness to God's calling, their desire to be obedient to God's will, and God, in his providence, chose to take both of them on into heaven. Now, when you look about the two witnesses, that's another aspect to it. Some believe that the two witnesses that are discussed in Revelation are going to be Enoch and Elijah, because neither one of them died. Others believe that it's going to be Moses and Elijah. And we can see that. I think one specifically will be Elijah for sure, because we see reference points to Malachi that talk about Elijah coming. If you want to look real quickly over in the book of Malachi, Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 talks about that prophecy that one will return in the spirit of Elijah, which that was John the Baptist. And then, of course, as I referenced a minute ago, with the transfiguration, you know that when Jesus was transfigured, Elijah was there along with Moses. So again, some theologians or some believe here that the two witnesses that we see in Revelation 11, verses 3 to 12, would be Elijah and Enoch again. People can come to different conclusions on what you believe. This is one of those that we don't have a definitive answer. I think it is going to be one of two. I think Elijah is going to be one. The question is, who's the other one? It's either going to be Moses or Enoch. There is definitely some that would argue for Moses because of what's said in Revelation chapter 11. If you want to turn over there real quickly to Revelation chapter 11, and we'll look at this of why those would argue that it will be Moses and Elijah instead of Enoch and Elijah. So listen to what John writes, Revelation chapter 11, beginning in verse 3. He says, "And I will give authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. These are the two olive trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. And if anyone wishes to harm them, fire comes out of their mouth and devours their enemies. So if anyone wishes to harm them, he must be killed in this way." Then it says in verse 6, "These have the authority to shut up the sky so that the rain will not fall during the days of their prophesying." And that's a reference point back to what Elisha, what was going on there during his ministry, and the prophecies that occur and the miracles that occur. Then it says, continuing, "They also have authority over the waters to turn them into blood, and to strike the earth with every plague as often as they wish." Of course, that's a reference point back to what happened with the 10 plagues there in Egypt. And of course, we know that was when the Lord used Moses. And it continues on, verse 7. "And when they have finished their witnesses, the beast that came up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them, and their dead bodies will lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt. There also the Lord was crucified. And those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days, and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in a tomb. And those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came upon them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell upon those who were watching them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven, saying to them, "Come up here." Then they went up into heaven in the cloud, and their enemies watched them. Okay? So again, reference point there, seeing the two witnesses. Some again thinking it's going to be Enoch and Elijah, and some believing it's going to be Moses and Elijah. So going back to our question here of why did God miraculously take Enoch and Elijah to heaven where they didn't experience death? Again, we don't have a clear answer from that. My assumption, or what I would come down to, is because of their faithful walk with God, God chose to take them to where they would not experience physical death. Okay. All right. So again, we'll do the same thing with this question here.